Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, June 12th, 2017. That means it's Refrigerator Repair Day. For those of you long-time or even short-time listeners to the show, it's a big day here. We've been waiting for the refrigerator repair guy to show up. Today's the day. Of course, all we know is that he'll be here between 8 and 12, which is, of course, when we do the show. So no one knows exactly what's going to happen today, but I do have some, I've got clips prepared. Rosalind McGregor prepared some clips just because she wanted to update you on what was going on in Michigan. As it happens, it may fill in nicely for when the refrigerator repair guy shows up at some point. Greg Dworkin will, of course, be here this morning. We'll see if we can't get Armando interested in joining us on the program, as he usually is anyway. Just in case of short-term interruption of the show, in case of doorbell ringing or door answering or telephone machine answering or what have you, just to make sure that we get some word on when the guy is coming and find out whether he'll interrupt the show. And if so, we'll be able to stage things from upstairs today so that the work can go on uninterrupted and you won't have to listen to any of it. I think we have a plan to go forward with this. The kids are home from school. School is over, and it's 9 o'clock. They're still asleep. To be a kid. We'll see whether they stay asleep, of course, as I begin to broadcast the show. And my own, dulcet tones will float down the hallway and rouse them from sleep and perhaps inspire them to take on the day or to get on their computers and play video games, whichever happens first. We'll find out. Daily Co's Radio is live regardless, as Bill reminds us all the way from Portland, Maine. Let's see, which will come first, he asks. Trump's impeachment or Kagro's refrigerator repair? Find out. It's a good long-term question. We've got a brand new compressor for the refrigerator sitting downstairs in the box. Hopefully it's, everything checks out with it. And it's a quick install. I am told it will take about 2 hours either way. Fingers crossed, sort of, I guess. I guess I kind of hope that they call after 11 so they don't interrupt the show and then do the work later. Busy day anyway, going to be running all over the place doing errands. It's summer. Greg probably knows a bit about this. The doctor's offices are filling up. The kids need their physicals for scouting camps, etc. And of course, it's also, for some reason, we scheduled everything, I guess, at the same time. So they got to be at the dentist, they got to be at the eye doctor, they got to be at the regular doctor, they got to be at the irregular doctor. I don't know. Anything that they can do, we've decided to schedule for like right now, and all the doctor's offices are swamped. Not too much will interrupt the show. Housekeeping notice, actually, does remind me. Wednesday, we'll have to go with rerun or pre-taped show. Fingers crossed that I can tape, for Wednesday and still remain relevant. Maybe it's a good sign. Maybe Donald Trump will be impeached between Tuesday night and Wednesday morning and we'll be out of sync with the news. But I would accept that as an outcome, even if it meant we were behind the times. One of the dentist appointments will interrupt. It's an emergency, nothing hurting terribly, but something that has to get done before the orthodontia. Woo. Yeah, so it's a pretty busy season, as you know. Meanwhile, in the rest of Washington, D.C., people obsess over everything else. We'll catch up with the news. Greg has a raft of stories we can catch up with. Everything's a little wacky today. I'm a little out of sorts because of my the different setup, and so the things that are supposed to be at this fingertip are instead at this fingertip. So we'll catch up with the news. Not too much happening over the weekend. Trump, I believe, spent the weekend at the Bedminster, New Jersey golf course, and mostly stayed out of the news. He did get his phone back by the end of the week, and he did make some controversial tweets, but he mostly stayed quiet for the weekend. I haven't seen anything erupt in the morning either. By the way, I guess the big news, Bill's got it right here. As a matter of fact, Melania Trump and Barron Trump have arrived in Washington, D.C. School year's over for Barron, too. So he's ready to move down to the White House, Melania with him. It's a little awkward, the late arrival, but I understood it. You don't want to move your kids in the middle of their school year. It really kind of sucks. And I guess it would suck doubly if you were also Baron Trump. Not that there's anything wrong with being Baron Trump, just that you arrive and you're the president's son and the focus of already too much attention, and then to be the new kid, and I can well imagine why they would have delayed this move. So one of the few things about the Trump presidency and the Trump family that actually makes sense to me. Ivanka Trump, who doesn't make any sense to me, was on TV this morning. I guess she went on Fox and Friends for her father's entertainment. I suppose she was there to defend him in some way. Can't imagine it worked very well, although I'm certain that Donald Trump thinks that it did. And we haven't really changed our positions over the weekend much that I can tell. I mean, my quick review of things, Donald Trump still believes he was totally vindicated by James Comey's testimony, which I can't fathom. And his fans seem to be willing to say they think so too. I'm not really sure why, but they do. He does it, so they do it. And and I guess the only other thing that really caught my eye this morning was that Trump has given Reince Priebus a deadline to fix whatever the hell's wrong in the White House. I'm not even certain what he thinks is wrong. Probably leaks, I would guess. And the fact that they've had to fire half a dozen people for lying on their security forms, et cetera, et cetera. But once again, the deadline is 2 weeks. It's the same deadline. We just read a piece about that. I think it was middle of last week, that it was a big joke that every time Trump says he's going to get something done, he says it's going to happen in 2 weeks. He didn't use the 2-week phrasing in this, but he gave him a July 4th deadline. And, well, it's like 2 weeks or so from now. I didn't actually count the days, and it's a little bit more, but it's essentially a 2-week deadline. What Reince Priebus is going to do to fix anything and any deadline, I have no idea. But I guess we'll wait and see, and then see whether he extends the deadline, or he's had it, or he thinks he's found a new chief of staff. It's going to be a shallow pool to draw from if he needs to replace the guy. Anyway, Greg Dworkin is here. His refrigerator apparently still working. Good morning, Greg.
How about yours?
Not yet. The guy hasn't called yet. I imagine sometime during the show I'll get a call or text, although so far all the warning calls and texts have gone to my wife, who's not here, so she will call or text to say that they have called or texted to say that they'll be here in 20 minutes, whenever that happens. And then we got to let them in, and then the 2-hour clock starts.
Okay. Well, that'll be fun.
Yeah, maybe by tomorrow the temperatures in the fridge will be up to speed and we can start moving things back.
So Ivanka Trump was playing the victim on Fox. It was a lot of, I can't believe how difficult and vicious Washington is.
It is tough, isn't it?
Yeah, well, she can always go to Germany, where she's very well received.
Oh, yeah, right, that's true. I mean, she
was booed and hissed on the stage, and, that's because people don't fall for that shtick. Oh. And, I suppose if she weren't a grifter and trying to, sell stuff to people, rip off other people's designs for her fashion line, and do other things that are basically there to make her money, then perhaps, people would be a little bit less vicious. But the point is that she's not just there to make money. She's supposed to be involved in government in some fashion.
Well, yeah, she is. And
that's why
no one knows
people are vicious about it, because they don't think she's qualified to do that any more than her husband is.
And qualified or not, she's done a terrible job of it. I mean, actually, that goes straight to the qualification. She's done nothing. So she's done a great job of doing nothing and a terrible job of doing anything. How's that?
Well, that's a good formulation. So what's happened over the weekend? The Comey testimony has really settled in. I have quite a bit about that.
Excellent.
On the pundit roundup today. It's interesting. Preet Bharara was on the Sunday shows. He was on ABC with George Stephanopoulos and was interviewed and said not only is there enough there for obstruction of justice, but basically Trump likes to intimidate people and to co-opt them. And he tried to do that with me, and I wouldn't take his call, and 24 hours later I was fired.
Yeah, I did see something about that. It was kind of funny because they were criticizing him for refusing to take. That's why you were fired. You refused to take the president's call, which in some situations might make some sense, but they were just.
But with Comey, why didn't he just refuse to take the president's call?
Right. I mean, they just asked why he didn't do that, and then Bharara did it, and they fired him for it. So it doesn't make a difference. The president was going to fire them either way. Calls, no calls, doesn't make a difference. That should be obvious, but
it should be obvious. And so let's take a look a little bit about that. There's this really interesting piece here by a fellow named Jeffrey Kabaservice, Kabaservice. Jeffrey Kabaservice is a historian, and he's author of a book called Rule and Ruin, The Downfall of Moderation and the Destruction of the Republican Party from Eisenhower to the Tea Party.
That is some title.
And he has an op-ed in the New York Times called The Great Performance of Our Failing President. It's very interesting and worth a little bit spending time on.
I'm ready for that.
On the morning of the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing with James Comey, the former director of the FBI, a number of bars here opened early to allow political groupies to celebrate or drown their sorrows while watching the proceedings live. And it got a tremendous viewership. It got more than the NBA finals game. I'm afraid that I let this experience pass me by, he writes. I had to work, and besides, I didn't think the hearing would do anything to change President Trump's behavior or his base's indulgence of it. And it's that base indulgence that I'm reading this article for, because I think it's really fascinating. It's true that President Trump's ratings are the lowest of any modern president at this point in a first term, which has hamstrung his ability to pass any major legislation. But he has triumphantly succeeded in turning politics into spectacle, transforming the complicated process of government into something more like made-for-TV drama. I mean, even more than Schoolhouse Rock, I suppose. A lot of his supporters care more about the fight than the results, and the sense that the whole production is faked only adds to their enjoyment. In effect, what he's arguing is that this is wrestling. And you have to understand that his viewers look at it that way. They know it's fake, but it's entertainment. They don't care.
Okay.
As a political historian who writes mainly about the Republican Party, I've often puzzled over why far-right groups during the 50s and 60s had such an appetite for obvious falsehoods.
They were delicious.
Robert Welch Jr., founder of the John Birch Society, famously maintained that Dwight Eisenhower, a Republican, was a dedicated conscious agent of the communist conspiracy.
Oh. That seems unlikely. In hindsight.
It does. Other extremist groups charged that a committee of the University of Chicago eggheads was rewriting the Constitution to deprive Americans of the rights to vote and hold property.
Well, that's what eggheads like to do.
Chicago, of all places. Yes, and that the UN was training barefoot American cannibals in Georgia for an armed takeover of the U.S. Did the people who read those made-up stories actually believe them?
I'll ask.
Sidetrack of outrage. Megyn Kelly is going to be interviewing Alex Jones next.
Yes.
Sandy Hook truther. And let me tell you, people in Newtown are pretty upset about it.
Well, they ought to be.
Giving that guy a platform is just awful. But back to this.
All right.
In the 60s, Republican Party officials and conservative leaders like William F. Buckley Jr. were able to marginalize the John Birch Society and related groups, but today, it's the conservative establishment that's been marginalized. Birch-style fake news stories once circulated only among small audiences. Today, thanks to the Internet, they reach millions of Americans who make up a big chunk of the Republican Party's base.
Thanks, Internet.
I have quite a few friends who are avid consumers of Trump-supporting alt-right news websites, but I have yet to find one who actually believes the wilder fantasies they purvey. For example, no one I know thought there was any truth to the Pizzagate conspiracy theory propagated by InfoWars, among others, that a Washington pizza parlor was the center of a child sex ring linked to members of the Democratic Party. As one InfoWars reader I know from high school told me, to take Pizzagate seriously, you'd have to be mentally disturbed, which may well have been the case with the young man who came to the restaurant armed with an assault rifle to self-investigate the false claims.
Yes. The problem is we have a lot of those.
Yes. Many Trump supporters engage nonetheless in a willing suspension of disbelief when they partake of right-wing media. They enjoy the ridiculous exaggerations and outright lies for the outrage they provoke in Democrats, liberals, intellectuals, and pompous commentators of all political stripes. Populist conservatives also appreciate fake news for conveying what they see as underlying symbolic truths. Barack Obama is not actually a Muslim, but those who called him one were pointing toward what they saw as his cosmopolitanism, racial otherness, and seemingly discomfort with real America, Democratic officials do not actually run sex rings, but for fake news readers, they're part of the corrupt and all-powerful government that exploits helpless citizens for fun and profit. See Ivanka Trump. Yeah. Climate change science is not actually a hoax concocted by China and the scientific community, but many see it as serving the interests of globalists from both parties who allow the devastation of American manufacturing and the working class. One of the lessons future historians may draw from the Trump presidency is that populism and partisanship shouldn't mix. President Trump won the election in large part because he was one of the few candidates from either party to address terrible problems in the left-behind parts of the country, including the drug epidemic, declining labor force participation rates, and the rising cost of health care. But when he arrived in the White House, he merely added his own brand of insult to the usual Washington partisanship. I mean, it's not like he's going to go fix these things.
No, but he addressed them. Right. Hello.
So he goes on
yes,
and says, Trump cast himself during the election as the sole candidate able to break through Washington gridlock and get things done. Will his failure as a problem solver cause his supporters to abandon him? I doubt it. Scratch a Trump supporter and you're likely to find somebody deeply pessimistic about America and its future. This whole economic anxiety thing, it's not actually based on facts.
America is a hellhole, the same campaign platform they've always had.
Right. Few believe he'll be able to bring back the good times, however they define them, because they're convinced that the system is rigged. The deep state is too entrenched, the demographic tide too advanced, the global elite too powerful to allow real change, but they appreciate President Trump for fighting the fight, especially when it involves going against the wishes of his own party and the customary norms of presidential behavior. The Comey hearing, then, is unlikely to change their minds. Anything short of blatant evidence of illegality will simply play into their narrative of the president's battles against his diabolical enemies. They will continue to see President Trump as the ultimate political independent, taking on the whole world. Even if it's an empty performance, it's bound to win applause.
He is taking on the whole world. I mean,
from his side, though, does get the applause. Now, yes. I want to contrast that, or at least marry it with another piece here by Bruce Bartlett, and this is in USA Today. Will Republicans ever stop defending Donald Trump? And goes through who he is and where he stands and the fact that there are some people in the party who privately, and this is kind of well known in Washington, privately people disrespect him, but publicly they're afraid to. Bartlett writes, I left the Republican Party 10 years ago to become an independent. But I know many Republicans who still belong to what I might call the Romney wing. Conservatives who aren't radicals, who don't want to tear the whole government down to get their way, who remember when competent governance was the hallmark of Republican presidents. Republicans like these only need a critical mass of like-minded party members to go public in order to join them. It would help if they had a prominent leader. Where have you gone, Colin Powell? The nation turns its lonely eyes to you. And an organization to represent them, but this could arise quickly and spontaneously if the demand is there. I don't believe that the Democrats can bring down Trump. I believe that Republicans can. That's an important point. Doesn't matter what we say to them, but the other side of the coin is it doesn't matter what they say to us. And that's why it's interesting, but not worth obsessing over the fact that Trump voters haven't changed their mind yet. But first, he writes, they must come convinced that they don't have any choice and they won't be committing political suicide if they do. Now, along those lines, I have a piece here from a group called Change Research, maybe not the most reliable super-duper pollster ever. But here's their piece. Data analysis, Gianforte's voters weren't swayed by assault.
Okay.
And from the blog, that goes along with their group. I was curious about whether Greg Gianforte's assault of a reporter had a meaningful effect on Montana's election. Would Rob Quist have won if the assault had happened before absentee ballots has been sent? The long and the short of it is no. I consulted all the social science literature on effects of a leading candidate assaulting a journalist on election eve. Just kidding, there aren't any. When we heard about Gianforte's assault, we were very disturbed by his actions, but we realized we were in a good position to see what the effect would be. We've been surveying people in Montana about the election, yielding a very good snapshot of what the state looked like politically before the attack. After the assault, we resumed surveying. Our resumed survey received 911 responses between 8 p.m. Montana election eve and 11 a.m. on election day. The overall responses pre-assault and post-assault were almost identical. This includes self-described definite voters only. Among probable voters, Gianforte had a stronger lead. but it's worth asking some more specific questions. Republicans were overwhelmingly supporting Gianforte before the assault. Did the assault affect which candidate they support? Not much. Here's a comparison of our survey data on Republican early voters and Republican election day voters. Okay, these are Republicans now. The early voters, Quist got 2% and Gianforte 88.8, and definite election day voters 5.6 and 85.4. So maybe a couple of points. And that was their conclusion. It might have changed the election by like 2 points.
Oh. Well, it's their points, but yeah, okay.
One by more than that, so it wouldn't have made a difference in the end. So what's the total effect? Adding together, our upper bound estimate is the assault cost Gianforte between 1 to 1.5% of the vote. And what if the assault had taken place earlier? It might have been 2.5 points.
Okay.
And in the end, it really didn't change their mind.
Right. So if you're going to be assaulted as a reporter, you want to generally try to...
Once you've made your choice and you've done your tribal allegiance,
yeah,
little things like facts don't really make that much of a difference.
Yeah, I guess so. And of course now, Gianforte and others can point to this, as you're beating up reporters and reporters say, my goal is not to become the story. You say, don't worry about it. It's probably not going to have much more than a point and a half. I timed it properly. I'm beating you up on election eve. Had I beat you up earlier, there's a chance you could become the story in a closer race.
Now, there are people other than Trump voters
who
in the large group of the American electorate. And I have a piece on this, but I'm going to send you this graph. This is from Huffington Post YouGov.
Oh, okay.
Link, it's really at the bottom of your list here.
Here we are.
And the poll is this story is from June 10th. Poll Americans trust James Comey over Trump. In other words, when all is said and done and you let all this sink in, it's true that the Trump voters aren't going to change that much unless there's more to it than what's come out so far. Just James Comey calling Trump a liar isn't going to do it.
No.
It's going to take, I learned this nickname over the weekend here. Okay. It's going to take Robert Mueller III.
Yes.
Also known as Bobby Three Sticks.
All right.
Yes, his father was Bobby Two Sticks.
Sure.
It's going to take something like that with more proof of something, whether it's, RICO style, money laundering for the real estate business, which is highly likely to be the thing that comes out of Mueller's investigation. And that's based on some of the lawyers he's hired.
Yes.
People who busted Enron, Watergate, RICO, that's the kind of team he's assembling.
Yeah.
And by the way, why is he doing that? Because I think that's really at the heart of the whole thing. Not so much that Trump was colluding with the Russians to change the election. He'd be more than happy to do that. That's what they wanted. What he wanted from them is money to support the real estate empire.
Yes. I think that's largely true. So
that's my best guess, and that's based on what we know. So, poll Americans trust James Comey over Trump. Few think Trump was right to fire Comey. Americans largely believe that former FBI Director James Comey is more trustworthy than Donald Trump, although his testimony did little to change minds about the seriousness of the relationship between the White House and Russia. By 20-point margin, 46 to 26, Americans say Comey's more honest and trustworthy than Trump, with the remainder unsure. Similar shares of the public hold favorable views of both men, 38% for Trump and 35% for Comey, but Trump's unfavorables at 53 are significantly higher than Comey's at just 33, despite the negative advertising there.
All right.
But here's, from the chart, some of the real interesting things. Who do you think is more honest and trustworthy overall? 46 to 26 say Comey. Clinton voters, 89 to 2. Trump voters, 70 say Trump and 7 say Comey.
Okay.
Pretty remarkable. But it's the last column there. Non-voters and third-party voters.
I see.
James Comey, 44, Trump, 15. Did you think Trump did or did not ask James Comey to pledge loyalty to him? 50% of the public says yes, 82% of Democrats. 34% of Republicans say he did, and 28% he did not. And 40% of the non-voters, third parties, and only 13% say he did not. So overwhelmingly, people accept that Trump did this. It's just that Republicans say, yeah, well, what's the problem? It's okay if you did.
Yeah.
Okay. And that in fact is the last question, the next question. So if you did, is it appropriate? Republicans, 72% say they did. Everybody else says no way, including 93% of Democrats. And do you think Trump did or did not try to order Comey to drop the FBI investigation into a former Trump advisor? 85% of Democrats say Trump tried to order Comey to drop the investigation, and 70% of Republicans say he didn't. Everybody else, kind of agrees that he did. And so what you have here is Trump voters isolated from everybody else, and that's why he's running 38, 39% in terms of job approval. Now, that may not change, but it's a fraction of the entire American, population. And it's a fraction, not a tiny one, but a fraction of the American electorate. And if the Trump voters wind up getting, very much in their silo, in their tribal way, it's still a small number of people. This is what I find so frustrating about going back to the same old Trump voters and saying, has he changed your mind yet? It's not going to based on this. And yet, it's still a factor because they acknowledge that he's a liar. It's just that they don't care.
Right.
That's very different than I don't think he's lying.
True, although they probably overlap somewhat. There are people who say, I do think he's lying, but I don't care. But when I get asked this question by someone who probably does care about things like lying, I'll just say, it doesn't matter to me, it does.
It goes back to that first piece by the political scientist looking at why Republicans accept garbage. They know it's garbage, but that's not the point. The point is it upsets you.
Well, there's definitely that. There's the faction that says I don't
care. It's a
but
huge factor there, right? And so, how is that going to wind up playing out? Well, let me. There's several pieces here that I have in the pundit roundup, but let me pick on one that I didn't put in the pundit roundup because it came out too late.
Okay.
And that is from David Drucker, a conservative, who went down to Georgia to see what's going on.
Looking for a Soldas deal. I know the story.
Yeah. Trump a factor in Democrat surge in Georgia. Holly Berg usually doesn't bother with congressional elections, but the 38-year-old Democrat, motivated by the opportunity to register her opposition to President Trump, has cast an early vote for Jon Ossoff, her party's nominee in the nail-biter contest for a vacant House seat in suburban Atlanta. I don't really like where we're as a country right now. I'm excited about the prospect of getting somebody in there that can stand their ground. Drucker was following Trump canvassers, talking to people. That's where this story comes from.
Okay.
7 months after Trump's unexpected victory left Democrats demoralized, a freshly energized liberal grassroots has listed Ossoff into contention in a June 20th special election for this traditionally Republican congressional district. And the theme, I think, for the rest of my segment here is going to be the differences between the progressive base of the Democratic Party and the moderates in charge of the Democratic Party in terms of how they approach these things. And we're going to see that in Georgia 6 on 20th, which is a week from tomorrow.
Voters have a better idea.
And we're going to see it tomorrow when we look at what happens in the Virginia primary for governor.
Yes.
I'll deal with that. You know a little bit more about that than I do. But for right now, Ossoff, a 30-year-old former congressional staffer who lives just outside the district because he moved to be with his wife and can't vote for himself, leads in the last 4 public polls. For Handel, Trump is part of the problem. Now, Handel's a bad candidate. She doesn't campaign well. She doesn't campaign often. Trump has definitely supported her. They're locked together. He has campaigned for her to raise money because Ossoff has raised a whole lot more money.
Yes.
Now, the Republicans have plenty of money because outside groups come in to make up the difference. And in fact, this is turning out to be the most expensive House race of all time. And one that the Democrats very much want to win. Ossoff is running as a local who is fiscally conservative, trying to fit his district. And Handel is trying to tie him to Nancy Pelosi.
Yes.
And that's the way the two campaigns are going. And whether or not that's the right or the wrong thing to do for everybody in the country running as a Democrat, well, it goes back to the original discussion about the Comey hearings. In a lot of ways, the Russia story is incredibly huge, but it has not ripened yet. And you really can't run on it just yet because the Republicans are going to dig their heels in and say you didn't prove anything. And the Democrats are going to say there's plenty of proof. And so you have your party lines and that's it. In fact, according to this David Drucker piece, the only reason that Handel's getting any Republican support is the Republicans don't want to let the Democrat win.
Right.
They really could care less about Handel. They think she's awful. They think Trump's awful. But they'll be darned if they're going to let a Democrat win.
There are such people, yes.
And that's the motivating thing. Just like, you know, the motivating thing for Republicans to believe crazy theories is because you don't like it.
Right.
So is that enough? Well, the enthusiasm isn't there.
Uh-oh. Dang it.
And in the original runoff, remember there was a runoff before they got to the final exam here of this particular
yes, that's right.
election. Ossoff did quite well. He almost got 50%, which would have obviated the whole need for an election. And the reason he did that well is he got more than 10% of Republicans voting for him. So this article points out that Republicans usually do well on election day and Democrats usually do well in the early voting. But right now, Democrats and Republicans are running even in the early voting, which normally would be a bad sign for the Democrat, except that he's getting a lot of Republican votes, so you can't go by that alone. One of the reminders that whenever we look at these elections, you can never just go on the early vote. You really have to wait and see what happens in the end. He's leading in the polls. It's likely, certainly possible that he winds up winning. This is, again, a 40-year Republican stronghold. This is Price's old seat, who's now running HHS. And it would be a huge upset for Ossoff to win, even if he's currently slightly favored. Other people call it a toss-up, and that's fine. He's doing much better than he should be, and that's giving Democrats hope for 2018. But until you get that win notched, you know, you really don't have the emotional, we finally did it kind of thing. And yet, he's running not as a full-throated progressive. He isn't one, and the district isn't going to support one. He's running as a blue dog. And if he wins, he'll win as a blue dog. And is that good for the Democratic Party or bad for the Democratic Party? That is a debate that the party's having right now. They're going to have it tomorrow when Ralph Northam runs against Tom Perillo. Tom Perillo, the more progressive of the two. Not that there's anything wrong with Northam's stances, but Northam is much more establishment than Perillo is. And we'll see who wins.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one, too. And then, so by Wednesday, well, my take on it is we have to wait for Wednesday to find out what, and written in all capital letters, what the Democratic Party needs to do based on the lessons of that day. And broadly applicable, everybody now has to do this, unless you don't.
No, in which case you can just look at what Jeremy Corbyn did and learn the lessons there, or even what Macron did in France and learn the lessons there, because everybody knows that there are lessons to be learned, even though nobody knows what those lessons are.
Yes, or whether or not any of those elections can teach them.
Yeah.
But, you know.
So there you have it. I mean, the fact of the matter is that all politics is local. That's been true. It's always been true, and it's going to be true. And so, you know, it's very difficult to have people come into the process who haven't been in the process, who are most welcome, by the way. But if you come in the process, you have to become the process. You can't come into the Democratic Party with the intention of running against the Democratic Party. It's just not going to work.
Oh, I need to write a memo. Hold on.
Okay.
There's somebody I know who's doing that.
I'm sure somebody did.
Okay.
And then, you know, you might be in the situation where nobody ever read the memo.
Oh, well, there's a lot of that going around.
But we'll have that conversation. You can have the conversation about the People's Convention that took place in Chicago. You can have the discussion about what happens in Virginia tomorrow, and you can have it about what happens in Georgia in a week. But you know, if you wait a week, you will at least have a little bit more, data behind your discussion.
Yeah. Oh, now it occurs to me that I'll be out on Wednesday. I won't even be able to discuss what happened on Tuesday. Well, you'll all know the answers, and then we'll get to it on Thursday if you weren't.
It'll still be true on Thursday.
True. I can talk to the dentist about it, and we can record that and play it for you. It just won't be very interesting. I mean, I'm sure he's a fascinating guy, but there'll be a lot of dental work going on in the background.
Yeah, that's always interesting. Here's a good piece from Jeff Greenfield that was in Politico magazine over the weekend. The GOP that failed, the party didn't decide, and now Republicans are stuck with Trump.
Oops.
And, he talks about explanations about what happened, but one overlooked reason, he says, and one for parties to remember if they hope to avoid future Trumps, is that the rules of the GOP greatly benefited Trump. The party allows winner-take-all primaries by congressional district or statewide, which in many states usually magnify Trump's delegate totals. Trump won 32% of the South Carolina vote, but all 50 delegates, 46% of the Florida vote, but all 99 delegates, the winner-take-all stuff. By contrast, Democrats, who abolished winner-take-all primaries more than 40 years ago, insist on a proportional system.
It sounds pretty good on the surface.
The result is that an intensely motivated minority cannot seize the lion's share of delegates. But either by cluelessness or willful design, the Republican Party had put itself in a position where one of the most significant functions of the party, the vetting of its prospective nominee, was rendered impotent. And we are living with that institutional failure every day. I mention that because of the discussion about Virginia tomorrow and who wins the Georgia election next week. It isn't dry academic, you're still relitigating the last election and the last primary stuff. In fact, it matters going forward because those rules, that process, and if you listen to Kagro in the morning on a regular basis, you'll understand what I'm saying about process here and its importance. This process winds up dictating what happens. And so it's well worth paying attention to, even if it's not as interesting as, let's say, Jeremy Corbyn suggesting that maybe Trump would be well not to visit the UK.
Oh, yes. That's off for the time being, as I understand it.
It's off and on. He's going to do it, just date not announced.
Yes. I think
said to Theresa May he doesn't want to do it if there's going to be protests because he's a special snowflake.
Right. Of course. Well, he needs a safe space, and the UK has got to be it. Exactly. I think the way he put it was he wanted to, he'll only visit when the people of Britain support his visitation. Of course, that's never going to happen. And it's no metric here either. I mean, Americans don't support him being president, but we can't seem to do anything about it.
So getting back to process, when I saw that Greenfield story, I tweeted a small segment of it. I said, you can hide, my Republican friends, but you can't run from this. So this may be a good time to remember, Jeff Greenfield wrote, that in a key sense, Trump happened because a well-established real-life mechanism that was in the best position to prevent a Trump presidency failed. And that institution was the Republican Party.
Well, they fail a lot.
Right. And Josh Putnam, who's a lecturer in the Department of Political Science at the University of Georgia, who specializes in campaign and elections, had a response to that.
Oh.
He said, I'm going to have to push back against this one from Jeff Greenfield.
Oh, dear.
And let's start here with the screen grab that Dem from Connecticut, that's me, pulled from the article.
Look at that.
If one wants to point fingers at reasons for Trump, point them at the Republican Party. I think he's correct there. But Greenfield's argument or evidence for it kind of goes off the rails because Greenfield jumps to blaming the GOP delegate allocation rules and lack of superdelegates for not properly vetting the nominee. Look, I'm not saying the allocation rules didn't have an impact. They were a factor, but presidential nominations are not Candyland. One has no option to bypass the peppermint forest by taking the rainbow trail. Remember that next time you run for office, okay? Yeah. Yes, that's what Greenfield does by entirely skipping the invisible primary to focus on the penultimate part of the nomination sequence. How the allocation rules factor into this in both parties is dependent upon the jockeying that occurs in the years before primary season. The formal and informal coordination or lack thereof of the broader party coalition during that period is precursor to the allocation. The simple truth is, frontrunners are developed during the invisible primary, and they tend to do well during primary season, and frontrunners do well, and far more often than not win, regardless of the allocation rules. What can differ because of allocation differences across parties is the pace of the nomination. And he has additional thoughts on that, but I'll throw it into a separate post. But I digress, he says. No. One's looking for a reason for Trump that can better be traced to a period before Trump ran down the escalator. Trump is not the problem, but admittedly problematic symptom of the problem. The problem resides in the broader Republican Party, but more in the formal-informal coordinating than in the allocation rules. I'm particularly reminded here of something Julia Zari recently wrote about party coordination. The party that couldn't coordinate in the primary couldn't coordinate in the election. The coordination actually is in Greenfield's words, one of the most significant functions of a party. If a party's hampered in doing that or doesn't do it, then a flawed frontrunner can emerge and do what frontrunners usually do, which is win and take the nomination. Now, the Republican Party at the moment has a problem because they can't coordinate how they respond to Trump's misdeeds, incompetence, and so on and so forth. Going back to the original article we talked about here, Republicans feel like they're stuck with him. They have no incentive whatsoever to break with him because they'll lose. And the only thing they really care about, even more than policy, is getting reelected.
True.
So until you give them an incentive that is in their interest to break from Trump, that's not going to happen. And the party really can't do anything about it because the party doesn't function that way. So again, it's all about structural stuff. And what I'll leave you with, which is a little bit depressing, is that because of that, because they have no incentive at this particular point in time to break from Trump, unless his polls drop even further, all of the resistance, all the indivisible calls, all the things about health care, all about calling the senators, the Senate's still likely to pass something.
Yes.
And we're all screwed because of it, because they got the majority. That's what happens, and elections have consequences. So you can run on that in 2018 and win back the House, and that, is I think the strategy that's going to take place.
Yeah, what else are you going to do?
But we're very limited in terms of what we can do to stop what's going on right now. We can't Alex Jones off the air. We can't stop the Senate from voting for health care if they want to because there's more Republicans than Democrats. Just the way it is. It's a structural thing.
Yes. Well, that's kind of, as horrible as the outcomes are going to be, it's kind of the way most of us would probably design it. If you win, you get to do the things.
Right. And so, part of the reason I bring that up is when this happens, just spare us if only you had done this and if only you had done that, we could have done. No. Once you lost the election, this was almost inevitable.
Yeah, I don't know how much of that. We'll hear about if only we had done such and such.
But
in
we always hear if only. What about if we had only put more? What about if the DCCC had only put more money into Montana?
Well, that's something. That won't.
No, because even looking at the story that we looked at, even doing the coverage of the assault a week prior wouldn't have mattered. When there were more Republicans than there are Democrats, you lose.
Well, right. Even if they had timed the assault better, you would have lost by one less.
There's still more Republicans than Democrats in Montana.
No, they'll be pointing.
And if you keep running elections in those places, you're going to lose more often than you're going to win, which is why John Ossoff's election next week is so fascinating. That may be one of the very rare situations where even with more Republicans than Democrat, we win anyway.
And you'll still lose the vote in the House.
Yeah. Even if he wins. Which is worth reminding people. Even if he winds up winning that election, we still don't have a House majority and won't until 2018 at the earliest. Yes. So
that seems very obvious, but you will
just encounter people when this happens.
If you look, you'll find a Twitter fight about it.
Yeah. Well, you're wrong, and I'm going to take you on that. So anyway, this is, that's my summary for today. Just thought it was interesting trying to wrap up everything that's happened over the weekend and where we go from here. This is Greg Dworkin speaking with my good friend David Waldman. Kagro in the morning. Thanks so much for listening. Someday his refrigerator will be fixed. Someday, all the dental and
now that goes on forever.
Work will be done someday.
My legal obligation to have it done ends at some point, but there
was an interview of a Trump voter in Georgia looking at, do you still support him? Of course, the answer was sure we do. But it was an old guy, a 90-year-old guy who said, the thing about Trump, yeah, I'm glad he's there, but boy, I wish he would just shut up. The guy just keeps banging his gums. I wish he would stop it.
Okay. He's probably himself literally.
So I'm just pointing out, to some people, someday the dental work does stop.
Yeah, I guess so. I won't be my dental work eventually.
But I love the expression. Stop banging your gums.
Okay. Hey, I wanted to ask you before you go. I'm searching up and down the list. Was it the change survey? Is that you were discussing about your second or third story?
I'm
looking
I'll
for
get
the link
that
for that. Okay.
I'll sign off, but I'll make sure that that's there. I don't know if...
I was searching all over the place. I thought it might be in the roundup, but I didn't see it there either. It's okay to bring in new material.
One of those, I got so many tabs open, but I'll find it for you. And there it is. I have it right here, and it'll be right at the very, very bottom.
All right. We're bloggers at heart, I guess.
There it is.
Thank you.
It's on Medium.
All right. I like it.
Alrighty. Take care, and I will talk to you on Thursday since you won't be here on Wednesday.
Yeah, I know. We're going to have to cut things short on our visitation this week, but not a bad way to do it.
We'll manage.
Yeah. We'll survive, and we'll all
the prisoner has visiting rights. I'll get it in.
All right. Excellent. Thanks very much, Greg.
All righty. Take care.
Appreciate it. You do the same, and we'll check in again on Thursday, Wednesday. Once again, dental appointment. Anyone who wants to go along with me. We're having a crown changed. It's not me. It's my son. What's he doing with crowns? Well, it's a long story. Anyway, he has brittle teeth. What can I tell you? At any rate, among other things, we'll be taking care of that on Wednesday. That will also mean having to either cancel with or reschedule Joan McCarter. We'll see what her summer hours are like. Sorry, Joan. Wednesday, I hate to miss a Wednesday. It's a real challenge, and I lose out on 2 good visits, and that's always helpful. This radio game, doing the 2-hour thing, there's a lot to take care of. Okay. Let's see. There are a couple of stories. I'm looking down Greg's list. There's definitely a couple of things. Well, every day there's a couple of things we don't get to, but I just wanted to. This was a solid block of stories here. I wanted to take a look and see whether there's anything that we ought to grab out of here. There's a few headlines that caught my eye. Let's see. That one we did. This one here caught my eye here. New York Magazine here. Let's open it up because it sounded like a headline we might want to at least take note of. Caroline Bankoff. So I'll thank you, Greg, for pointing this one out to us and including it on the list. D.C. and Maryland to sue Trump for accepting payments from foreign governments. This, of course, having to do with the D.C. hotel, it looks like. I think that's what is illustrating this piece in the photo. Let's take a look here. I'm not even aware of... I knew people would be suing him about this and under the emoluments clause and all the things that are tied up in that. We've been there before, but I didn't realize D.C. and Maryland. So let's see. D.C. Attorney General Karl Racine and Maryland Attorney General Brian Frosh planned to sue President Trump for violating the Constitution's emoluments clause, which forbids federal officials from accepting payments and gifts from foreign governments. There was developments on the emoluments front over the weekend, too, and hopefully I have that story set aside. If not, we can kind of summarize the events of the weekend. But let's continue here. The lawsuit, first reported by the Washington Post, will argue that Trump has broken the rule by failing to take adequate steps to separate himself from his business interests, particularly the Trump International Hotel in D.C. Representatives of Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Kuwait have all patronized the hotel since Trump's inauguration, many more as well. But those, I guess, are the official governmental clients. But private clients, that's the whole, that's the entire clientele, I think, of the D.C. hotel, minus the one guy who showed up with the AR-15 from Pennsylvania. Anyway, diplomats from elsewhere clearly believe that there are benefits to staying there during visits to Washington. While Trump did once promise to donate any profits his hotel made from foreign governments to the U.S. Treasury, he appears to have backed out of that pledge. And that is linked here. We should take a look at that one. But you'll recall, first he said, I'll send all the profits to the U.S. Treasury. Then it was, I will donate them to a charity of my choice. Then it was, I'll donate to a charity of my choice, but I'm not going to do it until the end of the year. And it's gotten worse and worse since then. And as a matter of fact, I don't know if it notes it here in this piece. Let me see whether I have something in pocket. But, I do. So terrific. I'll be able to add to that commentary. Should I continue with this article? Yeah, let me finish this one up. It's not that long, and then we'll go to the second point of this. So he's now backed out of that pledge, and we'll tell you more about why in a minute. Racine and Frosh, the attorneys general of D.C. and Maryland, respectively, told the Post that their suit will focus on how local venues, including taxpayer-owned and taxpayer-subsidized convention centers in D.C. and Maryland, might be losing customers to the Trump International. Good point, right? Have your meeting at the Trump International Hotel in D.C. to curry favor with the president, then you're not having it at some of the other taxpayer-owned and taxpayer-subsidized meeting places in the region. I don't know why Virginia's not joining in this suit, but whatever, maybe they will later. This case is at its core about the right of Marylanders, interesting way of putting it, residents of the District of Columbia and all Americans to have honest government. We do have that right, but how you enforce it, big question mark. That was Frosch speaking here. Racine added that the effort was intended to act as the check and balance that our kleptocrat-friendly Congress has so far declined to provide. If the case proceeds, the Attorney General will demand to see Trump's notoriously hidden tax returns, which would likely shed light on his relationships with foreign entities, among other things. Probably not that much, the tax returns, to be honest. I mean, again, most things by the time they reach the tax return, the tax filings level have been laundered or whitewashed appropriately, inappropriate, really. But by the time they reach the stage where they're entered into a tax filing, they've been run through the LLCs with shadowy ownership, etc., and through a couple of mix and match situations, throwing money into one pot and then moving it into another. In other words, there won't be a line item entry or even individual entries of payments from foreign governments on his personal income taxes. There will likely be just, well, who even knows? There might just be income from the Trump organization, which includes in it the bucket of income from the Trump DC hotel, which includes in it the bucket of income from foreign governments, which may or may not have been made directly or may have been disguised themselves, or it may have been that, it may not be illegal in Saudi Arabia for the government to pay money to a private firm and then have the private firm book and pay for rooms in the Trump hotel on behalf of the Saudi government, which, though might cause problems in the United States, if the United States had jurisdiction over all of those transactions, might not be problematic. Is anything problematic in Saudi Arabia if the king approves of it? I don't know. Anyway, it's very unlikely that the tax filings will show us what we need to know about that stuff. But, it'll likely give us access to those tax filings. If the case were to go forward, that's true. It wouldn't necessarily prove the case, but they'd likely be able to use the discovery process to get at those tax returns. Anyway, this isn't the first time that someone has tried to sue Trump over his refusal to divest from the Trump Organization's various holdings. Earlier this year, the watchdog group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, along with members of the hospitality industry, filed suit claiming that Trump's continued involvement in his company created unfair competition, breaching the Emoluments Clause. On Friday, the Justice Department motioned to dismiss that case, arguing that the plaintiffs lacked legal standing, among other things. Let's see if this links to the same article that I have set aside. It doesn't. It links to another New York Magazine article, which is smart, good vertical integration. Chaz Danner for New York covering this story, but and I should read the New York one because I was complaining on Friday that too much of my material comes from The Hill. But I haven't done The Hill yet today, so maybe we'll give them the chance since I parked that in Pocket first. Same story, but just to shake things up a little bit and use a different source, although perhaps by the end of the show I'll be sorry that I went early to The Hill. DOJ, Trump can accept payments from foreign governments. This is the headline. It's a little bit misleading in that it makes it sound like perhaps he had gotten a ruling from the Office of Legal Counsel or something saying it was going to be A-OK. And I don't think that's actually where it came from. This would be from the DOJ team defending the CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, CREW, a lawsuit mentioned in the previous article. So what this is this was their brief, the argument from their brief in support of the motion to dismiss the Crew emoluments lawsuit. Lawyers for the Justice Department are arguing, they haven't prevailed yet, they're just arguing it, that President Trump isn't violating a constitutional provision that bars federal officials from accepting payments from foreign governments because the clause doesn't apply to certain transactions. In a new brief asking a judge to throw out a lawsuit brought against Trump by ethics watchdog Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, or CREW, DOJ lawyers contend that the Foreign Emoluments Clause doesn't apply to fair market commercial transactions, like payments for hotel rooms and golf club fees, according to Bloomberg. So here we are reading in The Hill something that was reported earlier by Bloomberg, which is really just an argument made by DOJ lawyers in a lawsuit elsewhere. That's the way the news business works. Trump administration lawyers also argue that Crew and other plaintiffs lack legal standing to bring the case against Trump and that the Congress, not the court system, should determine whether Trump is in violation of the Emoluments Clause. That's interesting. That's sort of a two-pronged approach to that question. One, they claim that Crew shouldn't be allowed to bring a case in the courts because they haven't suffered any direct damage from the alleged violation of the Emoluments Clause. But that's why they signed up along with, they brought plaintiffs from the hospitality industry who claim that, and it is a little bit of a stretch, the argument, but here's how it goes, that other clients of the hospitality industry, whoever they may be, whether they be foreign governments or anyone else, will be unduly motivated to take their business to the Trump hotels rather than any other hotel in the world, with the idea in mind that it will curry favor with the president, whether they need to do so directly or indirectly, whether they need to do so on an immediate basis or bank the goodwill for something in the future. The thinking is that if you're a foreign government or any other kind of entity, that if you stay in or spend money at a Trump hotel or Trump facility and then later need a favor from the president or need it immediately, you are able to, if you are able to meet with the president, or maybe you want to use this as leverage to try and get a meeting with the president, you let it be known. We've spent $100,000 at the Trump hotel or at the Trump golf courses, or we're members of Mar-a-Lago or anything, whatever it can be, to get the word to Trump that you've been spending money in ways that end up in his pocket. And, I mean, it can be as, depending on how you view these things, I could see, particularly with foreign governments where this stuff isn't necessarily illegal or even frowned upon, a sort of an almost in a way innocent sort of interest in having something to say during small talk, chatter with the president. If you have a visit already scheduled, you're the, I don't know, prime minister of pick something, Montenegro. No, he's already shoved that guy aside. Whatever, you're a foreign government official making an official visit to the United States. Maybe it was pre-scheduled a long time ago. Maybe you're from such an awesome and major country that there's no question but that when you arrived in the United States, you would meet with the president. And then you just want to be able to say, so while I was here, I stayed in your hotel and it was really nice. Although usually you have an embassy and there's an official residence that's used by the head of state, both for security reasons and for whatever else. So there's really no need. But whatever. Even if it's just I went to your hotel's restaurant for dinner. I went to your hotel's bar for drinks. Or I avoided the hotel completely, but I decided to play golf. And I've actually got a friend here who's a member of Trump National out in Virginia. I'm going to go play on your golf course, and you say it was fantastic. Just making small talk. I enjoyed a Trump property and thinking it gives you something to break the ice with. Or it could be as nefarious as I bought a gin and tonic at the bar, and I just wanted you to know I opted for whatever reason to pay $100,000 for it. That comes up later. I'll tell you why I bring that up. But, there's plenty of reasons why the rest of the hospitality industry might be concerned that all things otherwise being equal, you might as well go ahead and spend your money when you're in town at a Trump-owned facility, because at least you have something to talk about with the president. Even if you don't plan to spend a major amount of money, that's money that could have been spent at a competitor, because they have gin too, and they also have hotel rooms, and some of them are a lot better. Certainly the restaurants are purported to be a lot better elsewhere, but they're not getting that money because either somebody wanted to be able to tell the president just for fun that they did it, or they want to be able to essentially bribe the president and say they spent lots of money there. Or really, even just, I was in DC and everything, everything's Trump-centric there now. And for the camp value, just to say I made a trip to the United States during the Trump era, I just felt like I had to go to a Trump thing. That would be relatively fair, except for the fact that all of the sudden interest in Trump facilities is not because they bring a better product or because they offer superior service, but because of the connection to the president of the United States. And that's what creates the issue. Even if you just want to spend a couple of bucks there, there's no separating these things necessarily in every instance, but you can recognize a trend. And the hospitality industry hopes to be able to prove that. Plus, of course, Trump being Trump, he loves to go for the giant, overly obvious gestures. And you'll find the record replete with things like that, like we mentioned during the Qatar discussions, that Bahrain had just in the middle of their planning process up and moved their National Day celebration from one hotel in Washington, D.C. to the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C. And the motivations for doing so seemed fairly obvious. Anyway, I wanted to get around to actually explaining a little bit of the dual-tracked argument on standing. So, to me, though it's a little bit of a stretch to be able to make that argument, it's enough normally to get you some standing in a lawsuit, and at least not to dismiss it outright, but they might ask that they brief it again at the start of trial, and they could take a closer look at it and say, give us some more details, give us some data to shore this stuff up. You say that it could happen. If you can show me more about how it is happening, I'll be more inclined to go ahead with it. So there's that sort of standing question, but there's an additional question that the lawyers raised, and it was wise for them to raise it, that no one could have standing, hospitality industry or not, direct proof of diversion of what would otherwise be revenues for competitors being diverted to Trump institutions, Trump-owned properties instead. No matter what you can prove, these lawyers are arguing, and again, I think wisely, why not cast the net this wide, that the emoluments clause is something that judgment gets rendered on by Congress, on which something gets rendered, I guess is how we should construct that properly. In other words, the emoluments clause gives Congress the opportunity to give its stamp of approval to the acceptance of emoluments. They have not done this, and it was imagined, I'm sure, by the framers that it would be a rare event that they would, because they would be, well, jealous in the broadest possible sense. That is to say, jealously guarding their prerogatives, if not actually jealous of the emoluments themselves, so that probably plays into it too. But if the Congress can okay the acceptance of certain emoluments or any emoluments, it doesn't actually say this, but they're sort of constructing this argument that says, well, okay, if they are the ones who can give the stamp, the seal of approval to acceptance of emoluments, then they may be the only ones who can tell you with any certainty whether the emoluments clause is being violated. That's not as open and shut a thing as they're hoping for, because, you can certainly well imagine a world in which the courts can rule, right? Well, in our opinion, the acceptance of emoluments is otherwise prohibited, and in the absence of action by the Congress, we'll say, emoluments have been improperly accepted here. Now, the Congress can do something about that. They can sort of overrule us by, even retroactively, rubber stamping their approval of the acceptance of those emoluments, at which point, a court may say, well, we'll vacate our decision. At that point, they might, I guess, you could try and make the argument, the courts say, well, you had your opportunity to okay this before. This was a slow-moving case, as most cases are, and while it was pending, you should have acted, at which point we would have dismissed the suit. But having let it go forward and lost, we won't allow you to retroactively clean this stuff up. Or, on the other hand, they may say, well, it seems to me that my interpretation, anyway, of the Constitution is that it does permit you to do this retroactively, and it belongs as a political question, and we'll dismiss it. So, two arguments here. One, that if courts are allowed to decide this question, these plaintiffs don't really have a direct enough connection to economic harm and can't prove that the economic harm they allege is directly connected to the president's interest in collecting emoluments. And then there's also the argument that no court could handle this no matter what they wanted to do, either before the Congress agreed to take it up or after. We simply have to wait for Congress to speak on this. It seems a little bit ridiculous, because if Congress were never to opt to speak, and courts were also precluded from ruling on it because Congress has the option, even if they don't exercise it, then inaction by everybody simply, ends up having the effect of rubber stamping the acceptance of emoluments. And I don't know that anybody in their right mind would come down on in that position. Like I said, in their right mind. I have no doubt that you could find Republican judges who would be very happy to come down there, but Armando could tell you more about that, I'm sure. Let's see. In other, the rest of this article here, I was going to say, I think that covers the standing issue, but there's even more to it. Crew, The Hill tells us, filed the lawsuit during Trump's first week in office to stop President Trump from violating the Constitution by illegally receiving payments from foreign governments. We did not want to get to this point. It was our hope that President Trump would take the necessary steps to avoid violating the Constitution before he took office. That didn't happen. That, according to Crew Executive Director Noah Bookbinder, he did not, he says, go on to correct the situation. His constitutional violations are immediate and serious, so we were forced to take legal action. The lawsuit has since added several new plaintiffs, including an association of restaurants and restaurant workers, and a woman who books banquet halls for Washington, D.C. hotels. I think we already knew about her. She's sort of like a freelance third-party event booker who I guess is otherwise paid in commissions or what have you. Maybe not. I don't know how she's paid, but the point is that she books events for hotels other than the Trump properties, and I guess claims that there are fewer people booking at non-Trump properties than there used to be, and so she's got direct economic damage from that. We'll see whether anybody's claims survive the standings inquiry. I think that they should. I don't think that's really such a stretch. The bigger issue, as we pointed out, is one, the possibility that a court may say Congress is the only one that can speak on this, which I think is rather ridiculous, or that they may rely on that. Well, they'll certainly bring up the argument, the broader interpretation of conflict of interest rules, to put it kindly, that Trump and his folks put forward early on in this controversy, that there's no such thing as a conflict of interest for the President of the United States, which is about as ridiculous as the idea that courts are precluded from even touching such a question, and that the only people that can speak to it is Congress, and if Congress opts not to speak to it, no one else can. That's not much of a check or balance, to be honest. But okay, it's out there. Very often, usually though, most of these checks and balances, unless it's, well, see, I guess that's the question. Unless it's explicitly made the exclusive province of one or the other branches, a lot of the checks and balances have slightly different approaches that the other two branches can make, but usually there's something somewhere for both of the other two of the three branches in order to involve them all in checking and balancing the others. There are a few that are exclusively reserved for the presidency, of course, the veto. But, well, you know, even there, like a presidential veto of legislation, but then there's judicial review, which is not explicitly outlined in the Constitution and was, I guess, controversial in the first instance, in which the right was claimed and established, Marbury versus Madison, but it's stuck around for quite a while. But then, I guess issues like overriding a veto, I mean, that's, I think, pretty exclusively in the hands of Congress. And impeachment, of course, also exclusively in the hands of Congress. Although, I guess you could, again, depending on where you come down on the question of whether or not a president can be indicted or prosecuted while sitting in office, you could say that the courts are precluded from acting in any capacity that would remove the president from office or incapacitate him in his ability to execute the office. But I guess if you interpreted the law differently, you could say, well, there's a sort of a minor league version of that available through the courts if you'll allow a president to be prosecuted while in office. But we're unclear on that one. That one's still up in the air. Anyway, let's see. We can move on to some other issues surrounding these. Although I did have an interesting exchange, just to sort of make my own point one more time. I mentioned the possibility of showing up at the bar and paying $100,000 for a gin and tonic. I did see over the weekend people's reaction to the story that the DOJ was arguing that Trump can accept payments from foreign governments. The argument there being, again, from the Hill and in Bloomberg, that if you're paying fair market value, if you're making a fair market commercial transaction, like paying for hotel rooms and golf club fees, the DOJ position is that those aren't emoluments, essentially. That he happens to own a hotel, and if you want a room at the hotel and you just pay the regular going rate for the room at the hotel, yes, you are putting money in Trump's pocket, but Trump is also, in the transaction, his part of the bargain, spending money to maintain the hotel room so that you can stay in it, and it's just a fair market transaction. It's not a gift to the president. It would be a gift to the president if, for instance, you were to simply bundle up the amount of money one might normally pay for a hotel room and put it in an envelope and hand it to him and not ask to stay in the hotel room. That would be problematic, right? That's just a straight up emolument. But if it's traded for at fair market values for the right to use the golf course, the right to stay in the hotel room, that they're arguing is enough to take it out of the emoluments setting. Of course, that didn't help anything. No one ever argued way back when that if you're paid fair market value for a bag of peanuts from Jimmy Carter, that was outside of the emoluments clause's understanding. But whatever, they went ahead and I guess an abundance of caution for people who actually were cautious about things and cared about the way they looked in front of the American people and the press. He went ahead and liquidated his holdings in the peanut farm he had built. Trump just says, my people don't care, and leaves it at that. Or they're actively rooting for me to make money, possibly. So He just interprets things differently. That's the idea. But of course, that's rife with problems. I did see, who was it that was tweeting about this? There was an exchange about this DOJ argument over the weekend, and I saw, is his name Blake Hounshill? Is that it? He's the editor, I think the editor-in-chief of Politico magazine, which we were reading earlier when Greg was on. Oh, this wasn't the article we were talking about. Well, others were reading things and putting the headline on that, like the Hill did. The DOJ says that he can take payments from foreign governments. Blake was pointing out, well, that's a little bit misleading. What it does say, you're leaving out the important caveat that it needs to be a fair market value transaction. And that's true. It did say that. The only problem was, what the hell is that? Just like with anything. Basically, you want to know what somebody is going to end up fighting about in any lawsuit. Just make it a definitional problem, and they'll certainly be arguing about that. Yeah, there we are. Blake Hounshill. It's Hounshell, in case you don't know the spelling of the name of the editor-in-chief of Politico magazine. In fact, that is correct. Let's see. I shouldn't have opened that because now I'm going to have to go back and scroll through the whole thing again. I should learn my lesson in the way that TweetDeck works. Anyway, I guess he was responding to, was it Dan Pfeiffer who was initially saying this? Here we are. Let's see. More scrolling. Yes. So he's responding to Dan Pfeiffer, who was saying, hey, this situation is nuts. And saying, you misinterpret things. I don't think, Blake says, that's what they're saying, that he can just take any government payments from any foreign government. It has to be a fair market value. That's the key phrase here. So here, I just put it to him this way, and Blake happened to agree at the end. You know what? That's a good point. If a room at the Trump Hotel goes for $500 a night, and I think some of them do, and not even necessarily the suites. It's an expensive hotel. But let's say a room at the Trump Hotel goes ordinarily for $500, but somebody decides to pay $10,000 instead. And it just literally does that. Why would they do that? Because they're trying to bribe the president, obviously. I mean, you might say, that's crazy. Why would anyone do that? Well, I don't know. But what if they do? That's the point. You want to try to imagine these things. Suppose somebody says, I understand that the bill only says $500, but here's $10,000 in cash, or charge my credit card. I'll authorize it. Just take it. Please do that. Now, I don't know that the desk personnel at the Trump DC hotel are likely to agree to simply take that, though there may very well be instructions that if you get something like this and it makes you uncomfortable, and it should, it's unusual. What do? Call the manager. Well, the manager might be authorized to take that $10,000 and they'll take care of it, and the person at the desk is off the hook. They didn't do the deal, right? But suppose people decide to do that. I don't know why they would. I don't know. I mean, it might be crazy. I understand they want to bribe the president. Why don't they just go ahead and bribe him? Well, because they're looking for a way that's arguably not a bribe. If I just walk up to him and give him $10,000 in an envelope and someone sees it and reports it and I get arrested for bribery, I'm going to have a very difficult time beating the rap, assuming there are witnesses to this thing. But if I say it wasn't just $10,000 out of the blue, it was for a hotel room. Well, for one thing, we have a problem because fair market value means what? Now, ordinarily, for the layperson, it's, a hotel room. It's listed right here. It says $500 a night. That's the fair market value. Well, economists will tell you, in some cases, we might be a little bit more broad about that. For instance, if there's a hotel room shortage, like during the inauguration, which they didn't have this time, but ordinarily they do have when a popular person is being inaugurated. And hotel prices go to $600 because of demand, like surge pricing for Uber. You all understand Uber. For some reason, you missed this in the larger economy that already existed, but Uber has clarified it for you, perhaps. So now it's $600. Well, fair market value. Is it $500? Is it $600? What about the fact that ordinarily, if you stay in a hotel, you'll very often see posted on the inside of the front door to the room, Usually, there are local ordinances that require this stuff to be posted. In addition to showing you the way to the nearest fire exit, there is very often either a maximum occupancy for the room or sometimes the agreed upon rate, a maximum rate, sometimes a minimum rate, and it will often, though, post a much higher price for the room than you actually paid, because they know very well that although the maximum allowable price under local law is $1,000 a night, and not all localities have such a maximum, but those that do will post it, and you only paid $350 a night for the hotel room, and that's because the proprietors, the management of the hotel knows that in the open market, that's all it can fetch. At some point, when it becomes $500, $600, $700, and there's no shortage of hotel rooms, ordinary rational economic actors will say there's very little value to me in buying the Trump name here, especially if I'm not trying to bribe the man. Instead of paying $700, I will pay $350 for the fun and experience of staying in a Trump hotel, such as it may be, but I can do much better and even get a nicer room for the same price a block away at the Ritz-Carlton or what have you. Right? So what is fair market value? The only thing economists can usually say about it is that fair market value is whatever you decide to pay for the thing and gets accepted for it. If the seller will take that money for it and you're willing to part with it, whatever that number is fair market value. And so it is entirely possible that if I am willing to part with $10,000 for a hotel room that I could ordinarily have for $500, and the proprietor is willing to take that $10,000, because why wouldn't they be, then the fair market value of the room is $10,000. Now, that's what you would have being argued in a courtroom if you had a law and economics trained attorney on hand. That would be not necessarily the exclusive argument made, but certainly among many. And some judges would look at that skeptically and say that's ridiculous. That's just bribery undercover. And others would say, well, I get your point. What is fair market value? Well, I guess it's the amount that someone is willing to pay and the seller is willing to accept for the exchange. And therefore, economics tells me, Merriam-Webster tells me, what have you, that $10,000 is fair market value. Now, God forbid you get your case taken up by someone like that, but why would that even happen? Where would you find such a crazy judge who would be willing to say, look people in the eye and say, yeah, $10,000 is fair market value for this hotel room? Long-time listeners to the show won't be surprised unless you've forgotten that we've had this discussion before. Like I said, there are law and economics trained attorneys, and there are also law and economics trained judges who are, educated in this. And it's not nonsense. It is the economists' definition of fair market value. So if you're trained in law, regular law, like what makes sense, versus law and economics, which is sometimes what doesn't make sense, although, it's geared to make sense. It can be perverted. But you may know, as a longtime listener to the show, I went to law school at George Mason University, which is very much steeped in, has overtly adopted a law and economics curriculum. One of not very many, but a growing number of law schools. Lots of law schools will teach it or give you some kind of introduction to it, but it's not necessarily the curriculum. But it's a huge thing at George Mason. And they always liked to say the whole time that it was originated at the University of Chicago Law School. But I don't know. I think the George Mason folks take a different approach to it. I do know University of Chicago trained lawyers who don't consider themselves to have had training primarily in law and economics and the economic way of thinking, to borrow the title of a book that was required first-year reading for us in George Mason. George Mason people, I think, feel like I got a law and economics education. It permeated every class intentionally. George Mason University as a whole is also, of course, home to the Mercatus Center, which we've also discussed on the show before, chiefly for its role in hosting law and economics seminars for judges, teaching them the basics of law and economics, so that they would be equipped to render decisions like this in situations that call for it, or even ones that don't call for it. All right. Well, let's see. I got the incoming call here. I'll have to check my machine somehow in the next couple of minutes. We'll take a break and see whether a message is being left downstairs either by a telemarketer or by the refrigerator repair person. Usually the phone call means that they are somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes out. And we'll go downstairs and check that out, and also monitor the cell phone and see if anything shows up there. All right. Anyway, as I was saying, the Mercatus Center, well, actually, the Mercatus Center was doing this for, now that I think about it, congressional chiefs of staff, and had all sorts of policy issues, but some of which dealt with law and economics or were based in it. But there was also the George Mason University School of Law specifically was involved in, and they may have had partnership with the Mercatus Center, giving weekend seminars for federal judges to teach them not to, to understand why a lawyer would make such an argument, why they would show up and say, although you would ordinarily dismiss the idea that $10,000 is fair market value for this hotel room, you really need to actually entertain it because, after all, look at the economic definition of what fair market value is. If you're prepared for that kind of argument, when you see it, you won't scoff immediately. And that's the whole point, right? So what does it take to get you, quote unquote, educated in these ways? Well, what about if we had the weekend seminar at a beautiful seaside resort somewhere with a fantastic golf course? And I'm not even necessarily thinking like Mar-a-Lago or anything like that, but that might put a finer point on things if you did that. But prior to Trump being in office, they pick a nice resort and you'd get free golf, beautiful resort stay for, say, a 3-day weekend, maybe a nice steak dinner sponsored by corporate sponsors of the conference, et cetera, et cetera. The idea being to prepare you for probably these clients having lawyers show up and say you need to either dismiss this lawsuit against us or rule this way in a lawsuit when we make this economic argument. Not only did the economic argument make sense, but you enjoyed those delicious steaks. And to be honest, there are very few federal judges that would be swayed by delicious steaks or even golf vacations to simply abandon all judicial principles. But if in that pleasant setting an argument was put forth that made a certain amount of sense to them, and people can be very persuasive in these settings, they might very well be inclined to entertain that argument when it's presented to them. All right. Well, anyway, I just thought that was another interesting way of reminding you of the law and economics curriculum and where it might actually have an impact. Of course, there's more. A couple weeks ago, we were also discussing the activities of, which one was it? The Bradley Foundation in Wisconsin, and how they were attempting to replicate their model of success with the Wisconsin legislature and judiciary elsewhere in the country. And I told you about all the other interlocking right-wing, mostly right-wing, philanthropies, most also associated with the Philanthropy Roundtable, and how they were spending their money endowing chairs and lecture series and all sorts of other academic pursuits at universities all over the country. How is that related? Well, one of the activities very heavily funded by one of the major players in the Philanthropy Roundtable is paying for chairs in law schools in the discipline of law and economics. They wanted to make sure that as many of the law schools as possible around the country, and certainly the top law schools, had training available for law school students in law and economics, so that they too were steeped in this stuff and could make these arguments on behalf of corporate clients. Or if they should succeed to the level where they become judges at the state level or federal level, that they also would recognize these kinds of arguments and they would sustain them when they found them. So, more of the Powell memo, more of the right-wing infrastructure, long-term plan at work. All right, let's see. Oh, here's my update on the refrigerator, by the way. Let's see. He's in Gainesville, and arrival window of 10:45 to 12:45, but I would guess right around noon. Oh, okay. Well, that's not so bad. We'll keep an ear out. If the doorbell rings, I will, maybe we'll bring in, Roz McGregor. Rosalind can update us on, any number of interesting aspects of politics in Michigan, and if not, then perhaps I'll save those for later in the week, or maybe even for our big Wednesday show and help fill out things there. Anyway, I just thought that was really an interesting way of tying all of this together, and it would be really interesting if you began to see these things show up, and you'll be well prepared and conversant in the topic should it come to pass. And I'm betting that it really will. Probably not in something as blatant as paying $10,000 for a $500 hotel room, but not far off, because it does raise other definitional issues too, right? Like, for instance, what if they don't pay more than $500, but they don't occupy the room? Like, does that matter? Do you think that makes a difference to you? What if the government of, I don't know who, any government, what if the government of Qatar decides to get into this game, and they say, we have a delegation coming from Qatar, to the United States, no particular reason, or some fantastic reason. And we'll need the presidential suite for our sheikh, but we'll also need an entire floor, however many rooms that is. Or, they say we need a block of 100 rooms for our delegation and staff and security, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll take those rooms. They're $500 a piece. I'll take 100 of them and book it, and we'll pay you for it. Now, suppose they only needed 50. Are we going to be any the wiser? Or suppose they didn't need any, or suppose nobody shows. But they say, well, I understand the hotel and hospitality industry. You know how it goes. I didn't cancel 24 or 48 hours in advance, so I have to pay, it's lost to me. I can't get a refund. Oh, well, I'm the government of Qatar. I have lots of money. That's not a big deal for me. But it also raises the issue of, did you ever have any intention of staying there at all? And is that something you might have been able to even pass on to the Trump organization? In other words, how would you find out if they booked a block of 100 rooms and they literally didn't use a single one of them, but they called the manager of the hotel, or they called Rents Priebus, or they called Steve Bannon, or whoever, and said, I just got to tell you, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, hope we're not being recorded. I wanted the president to know that we booked 100 rooms at $500 a pop in the Trump hotel. And guess what? I just wanted you to know, I know he's going to be disappointed, but we're not coming. We're not coming for the visit. But that also means that those rooms aren't going to be used. But we did pay for them. Our mistake, my bad. I booked them before I was ready, and I can't get around to canceling them. So anyway, they're going to be unoccupied. So I don't know. If you wanted to tell the manager of the hotel that, don't tell him this. But he'll probably, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, figure it out that now he can essentially double book those rooms. I'm just calling you now to tell you that I booked them, and I just found out that I booked them for August. I just found out we have the refrigerator repair guy is coming that day. He's going to refrigerate all of Qatar. It's going to be beautiful here. Finally, fantastic climate that we've been waiting for. We're going to refrigerate the whole country. It's not a big country. And we're not going to be available. So you can go ahead and rebook those rooms. You can, in fact, essentially double book those rooms and make $500 a piece off of anybody else, any other comers that you might be able to find out there on the market. And, as a gesture of goodwill, you just go ahead and keep that money we sent. One, is that fair market transaction? Is it a bribe? Is it an emolument? And now you've provided the money not in exchange for goods or services, but just out of the goodness of your heart. if you want to try and claim that, but we'll reserve the right for the courts to look into whether or not your heart is really that good. But secondly, is that not only is that not a fair market transaction, but one, did we have hidden motives here? I forget now. I had a different idea in mind for our secondly issue here, and I'm a little bit distracted trying to listen for phones and doorbells and everything. But if you did something like that, you haven't even really strayed from the $500 supposedly fair market value for the stuff, but you just did it knowing that you weren't going to actually consume those goods or services. You might argue, oh yeah, I absolutely meant to, I just didn't get around to it. And you know how it is. In the last 24 hours, things get crazy. And there might be circumstantial evidence that helps you figure these things out, like canceling months and months in advance and leaving a phone message that says, we're going to pay you anyway, but go ahead and double book those rooms. That would make things fairly obvious. But does it make sense? Or does it make sense even if it's as simple as we're going to rent out the whole hotel and we are going to use it? Does it make any sense to say that that's somehow not an emolument if it's a payment of $1 million and not just $500 at a time? It's a very difficult definitional question. And I guess to top it all off, as I protested to Blake, and the one point that we actually talked about this on, and he conceded was a good point, how will you know what's going on? If you're just trying to rent one room, a $500 room, and you pay $500 for it and cancel, or you try to pay $10,000 for it, or you just straight up pay $500, and there's nothing untoward whatsoever about your payment, but the guy next to you was trying to pull something, how will you ever know? How will you know that I had a fair market value transaction with Trump and somebody else did or didn't? You'll know about shenanigans because how? That's right. That's where the really big problem arises. The Trump organization, the Trump hotel, Trump himself, they're not going to tell you what people are paying them. They don't have to. They'll insist that they don't have to. They'll insist that you have no right to ask. They'll insist that they're a private business. They'll insist that it's none of your business. They'll insist that you can't have his tax returns. You can't see the books at Trump hotels. You can't see the books at the Trump organization. We're never going to know whether a fair market transaction took place. That's the shield they're using. But if you don't give me the information about how much revenue you're taking in and from what sources, and you're not open enough to allow an independent economist or market analyst to tell us what fair market value is, there's literally no way for us to even find out about bribes, much less define the terms of them, or no way for us to find out about fair market value and determine what that even means. The good news, though, is at least the Department of Justice has some idea that one of these days we're going to get a fair market for all of us to compete in. I'm looking forward to that part happening. But until that day, I have to worry about these things. And one of the things that, by the way, definitionally speaking, I suppose, as long as we're going to be leaving things up to the economists to define things in our law and economics paradigm here, searching for my words. One of the things that's essential to it is is free flow of information. Everybody's got to have the same access to information about what's going on in the market in order to be able to understand whether or not a free market, fair market value transaction has taken place. Nothing defines the Trump organization from top to bottom, from Trump personally to the Trump organization, to the Trump presidency, to the Trump White House, et cetera, more than his secrecy with these things. There's literally no way for us to know what's going on without getting a full accounting all the time, every time, of who's paying who, how much, and for what. And there's no chance we're ever going to get that about this hotel without forcing the government's way into it, and you know how they'll react to that. Well, that's not going to work. Thought I'd spend a little bit of time on that. Probably thought I was going to spend a little bit less than that, but what can you do? Let's see. Other news from over the weekend, and I keep imagining I'm hearing somebody knocking on my door, and I hope that's not really happening, is the rather astonishing news that, I guess it made the news when Delta Airlines has opted to withdraw its underwriting, its funding for the Shakespeare in the Park program in New York City, where they perform, of course, outdoors in Central Park. Shakespeare plays, an annual tradition, a big deal, of course, very big cultural event, unassailable, you would think, but apparently they're upset because, I guess, leave it to Fox News. I was reminded of this during one of Greg's remarks during his roundup. Leave it to Fox News to portray these things in the most ridiculous possible light. A production of Julius Caesar in a modern setting, as frequently happens with theater companies like this. A production of Julius Caesar in a modern setting with someone who appeared in someone to all outward appearances seems to be someone like, say, President Trump, in the role, not President Trump, not Donald Trump playing the role of Julius Caesar, but the person playing Julius Caesar, dressed in a suit with a red tie that's just a little bit too long, et cetera, et cetera. And, but everybody wearing suit and tie rather than, say, Roman period dress. We see this all the time. As a matter of fact, I did see somebody tweeting a picture of what purported to be a 1937 production under Orson Welles of Julius Caesar, though I don't know whether it was Shakespeare in the Park or where it was being performed, but it was very clearly Nazi themed. Not that Orson Welles was a Nazi, but rather that he was portraying the Julius Caesar play in the context of Nazi Germany, with whom we were not yet at war, I should point out, in Orson Welles' defense. You couldn't get away with that now, necessarily, unless it was a comedy. Is it like Hogan's Heroes? Still astonished that they got green-lighted Hogan's Heroes. Anyway, so Fox News portrayed it this way and said a New York City play, not in telling us in what context it was being performed or what the play was, a New York City play, because New York City, that place sucks, it's for liberals. A New York City play portrayed something that appeared to be the assassination of Donald Trump. Well, yes and no, and of course those of you who know the play or the history of Julius Caesar know he was assassinated. And yeah, they weren't in togas, so maybe somebody became confused about that, but I doubt it. I think that they did it on purpose. They just conflated these things so that Fox watchers around the country could generate some outrage about something that went on in New York City, which seems sad, to say the very least. I'll dig those tweets up for you. You'll take a look, and hopefully I can find that Orson Welles one as well. Okay. I think what I'm hearing from downstairs is not the doorbell or knocking on the door or someone shouting to me from outside, but rather one of the kids having woken up and has begun to play his video games. I wonder whether they'll have the good sense to answer the door or at least call me if the doorbell rings. We'll find out. Anyway, other stories occupying real estate inside pocket after this weekend. Let's bring you up to date on this one. Sure, we might as well take a look at this one. Political Wire was reporting this one from Playbook. Playbook is? It's not as dirty as it sounds. Playbook is whose production? Politico's. That's their morning roundup thing, where all the Axios people came from before they decided to form Axios. But they note this: there is a chance that Congress will stay in session for part, if not all, of August. The August recess in jeopardy. That's Tegan Goddard's Political Wire's headline on this piece. But this item in Playbook says they're considering it. Why? There has been political pressure from some members of the House and Senate to stay in town and try to get some things done instead of taking that 5-week recess. What sorts of things might they try and get done? They might have a more ambitious schedule than just the health care bill, but that's definitely coming up. We were talking about that at the end of this week, that there was some interest in trying to see, I guess, if, at a minimum, what was the Republican Party's resolve with respect to the recess. Ordinarily, they hate to give up recesses, and you can, in fact, get if you can force a bill's consideration to stretch into the time when it would be threatening any part of recess, you could ordinarily get them to drop it and recess, and you get a month's reprieve during August from whatever terrible thing that bill threatened. In this case, health care, and it would be well worth avoiding the threat, even if only for an additional month. So some strategizing going on, I'm sure, on the Democratic side about whether or not they can push final passage in the Senate side, anyway, on this health care bill past July, the July 4th recess. And what about the August recess? Could they even stretch it out to that? Well, it would be ordinarily very difficult to do that because of the reconciliation mechanism being used here. But probably even more difficult given that every recess is an opportunity for constituents to register their discontent with Republican members of Congress. And as we know, very few of them are willing to meet with their constituents. In fact, the vast majority of them have not had a town hall style meeting at all in their districts in all of 2017. Still relatively early in the year, still technically in the first half. Once we get to the end of June, we'll be halfway. But they're doing anything they can to avoid putting themselves in a setting where constituents can complain to them, particularly about this health bill. So they'll probably do anything they can to avoid that happening, including skipping a recess. And what better excuse could there be than to say, well, the reason we're not coming home and speaking to our constituents is we want to stay and work hard. Now, by the time we get around to the August recess, I mean, it's possible that even if the Senate passes its version of the health care bill before or even slightly after the July 4th recess, we might not be done with the entirety of the process by August recess. It's possible because, of course, there'll be differences between the House and Senate versions, and they'll need to set those right and reconcile, not to be confused with the actual term of art of using the reconciliation process. But anyway, let's see. So in all of this, they may stretch things out to then, and they might find themselves hoping for final passage of something that they could hand over to Trump for signature around the time that August recess begins. But in addition, even if they manage to do that very quickly after the July 4th recess, there is, of course, their threat, anyway, of a legislative overhaul of the tax system. Still have no details, including the tax brackets in this supposed tax reform proposal. But that's something that they would likely want to get done before taking off for a month, considering they've done absolutely nothing. Otherwise, two major goals would have been accomplished, in addition to which, in all likelihood, when people figure out exactly what's in the offing in the tax reform, Republicans will similarly be unwilling to go home. We will see. Let's see. This particular piece just goes on for a paragraph or so to say there's been political pressure from some members of the House and Senate to stay in town and trying to get things done instead of taking the recess. The pressure will only increase if the Obamacare repeal and replace isn't done in the next few weeks. Congress has just 27 days in session until the summer break. Maybe it's a blessing in disguise. Many lawmakers have had to face angry constituents on trips home. So it's not even that long of a stretch between July 4th and the August recess. I mean, it's for you and me, it's the better part of a month, but for them, they're just not in session that often. So we'll see. I don't know that they're going to be able to stretch the health care thing in the Senate out that long, but they might be able to stretch the Senate past July 4th, and that would put an enormous amount of pressure on them to get a uniform bill as between the two houses, depending on what sorts of procedure they're going to use. I don't know if they're going to go to conference or whether they'll just ping pong back and forth until they get the version that they want. And probably that, I would guess, because conference reports bring up a whole mess of other procedural issues that can eat up an awful lot of time. They're looking to avoid that, I'm sure, in the Senate. So that's the latest on that. You can be sure that Republicans will be talking about how hardworking they are should they decide to skip these recesses. More likely they're about avoiding their constituents. But of course, it's like your kids telling you, right, it's the night before the big project is due and they're up until 2:00 in the morning working on it, right? And they might say to you, well, look how hard I'm working on this project. And you might say to them, well, if you had really worked hard, you would have planned this out and you would have been done a long time ago and you would have been in bed a long time ago because the project would be done 3 days ago, or at least you would have been able to wrap it up tonight and not pull an all-nighter. Pulling an all-nighter, skipping your recess, that's not actually doing more work. It's making up for work you haven't been doing all along. All right. What else have we got here? Got a couple of interesting takes on the Qatar situation, which we might be able to squeeze in. Yes. You know what? Here, let's see. There's an entry from Lawfare blog. Do we have time to share this one? Is that worth doing or not? Let's see. There is. Let's see if we can squeeze it in here. Lawfare blog weighing in on the question you may have heard over the weekend about. Republicans spent a good deal of the weekend claiming that Jim Comey had done something terribly wrong, or maybe even violated laws himself in sharing his memos. And that the accusations stretch from everything from the very high level but very obviously wrong claim that Donald Trump made, that simply speaking to Congress about conversations that he had with the president is an illegal leak. That seems ridiculous on its face. To the somewhat more nuanced claim that when Jim Comey wrote his memos recalling each of his conversations with Trump and then provided those memos, shared those memos with a friend of his, a law professor, is that right? A friend of his, with the idea in mind that that law professor would share those memos with members of the press in order to generate stories that Comey hoped would end in the appointment of a special counsel. There's a somewhat more interesting claim there that sharing those memos with that idea in mind was some sort of violation either of confidentiality or privilege or even classification of the material. Of course, it wasn't classified. That should be tossed out right away. Timothy Edgar and Susan Hennessy took that on Lawfare blog under the title of In Sharing Memos. Comey did nothing wrong as a former official, and everything right as a whistleblower. Let's take a look at that. The world has waited for Donald Trump's response to yesterday's, that would have been Thursday's, stunning testimony from former FBI Director James Comey. Trump's uncharacteristic restraint and holding back from tweeting yesterday apparently didn't last long, and of course by Friday morning had written, despite so many false statements and lies, total and complete vindication. Remember that? And wow, Comey is a leaker. This more a stab at the very obvious and, like I said, high level in the sense that an overarching, overbroad accusation of wrongdoing. The idea that Comey, in discussing this in open session before a congressional committee, was leaking in some way. The notion that Comey confessed to something untoward yesterday by acknowledging that he had shared memos with a confidant and directed their disclosure to press sources, the more nuanced claim, is getting quite a bit of traction. They wouldn't even address the president's claim that simply talking to the committee was a leak. But if you wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, you could say he really meant that sharing the memos was a leak. Well, they dismissed that as well. Trump's personal lawyer Mark Kasowitz accused Comey of leaks of privileged information and went so far as to suggest that the appropriate authorities might determine there was criminal conduct worthy of investigation. Kasowitz has now indicated that he plans to file a complaint with the Justice Department's Office of the Inspector General on Comey's disclosure of the memo. It's not clear what the result of such an investigation would be, given that Comey is no longer a government official. So they might not even they may say you don't have standing to make that complaint, nor do we have jurisdiction to determine what happened here. There's just one problem, though, with this line of critique. Comey didn't actually do anything wrong. In fact, there's nothing to suggest his actions were illegal, unethical, immoral, or otherwise inappropriate. Starting with a little bit of background, February 14th, that would be the day after Michael Flynn had been forced to resign, Trump had a disturbing and possibly criminal, in its own right, conversation with the FBI director. After pointedly dismissing other advisors and senior officials from the Oval Office, Trump told Comey, allegedly, "I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He is a good guy. I hope you can let this go." Comey told the committee that he took this comment as a direction to drop the investigation of Flynn and memorialized his alarming conversation with Trump in an unclassified memo. Sharing the details with FBI senior leadership, the group was shocked and troubled, but without any way to corroborate the one-on-one conversation, they struggled with what to do about it. Then on May 9th, Trump suddenly fired Comey, and on May 12th, that Friday, Trump tweeted that James Comey better hope that there are no tapes of our conversations before he starts leaking to the press. On May 15th, the following Monday, Comey testified that he awoke in the middle of the night with the realization that these alleged tapes might corroborate his account of the February 14th meeting. And according to Comey, "I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons. I asked him because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel. I asked a close friend, now confirmed to be Columbia law professor Dan Richman, to do it." On May 16th, the New York Times reported that the contents of that memo detailing the Oval Office meeting. The following day, May 17th, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein appointed Robert Mueller as special counsel. Comey stated that he decided to disclose the memo because, among other reasons, "I thought it might prompt the appointment of a special counsel." Clearly, he was effective in doing so. But the defense of Comey's conduct is not that he achieved some greater good with an illegal leak. It is that he had no obligation to keep the memo confidential at all. And they therefore then walk through, as they say, the few claims emerging as lines of critique and why they don't hold up. I will leave that to you to read those on your own. Perhaps we'll discuss those later in the week with Armando on hand. But it is, luckily enough for me, time to sign off. Poor choice of timing for you. I would like to have shared this and so much more with you. We'll be back tomorrow to do that, and maybe some of this can be shared on our Wednesday show. Lots of things I could be pre-taping for you to do, but the good news is our refrigerator repairman didn't arrive during the show. The bad news is he's got 1 hour left in his window before we start to really sweat it and worry that our refrigerator never gets fixed. Anyway, the real news still to come here on Netroots Radio. Stay tuned for the after show with Wink and Justice. They'll catch up with a number of the other stories we haven't hit yet. Look, Uber made the news with them. Uber's board considers removing CEO Travis Kalanick. Is that the way he says that name? It sounds a lot like Kalanick. Probably doesn't like that. Over the company's abusive work culture. Yes, back in the news every time with the stupid culture of abuse there. A Georgia Republican lawmaker is taking heat for posing with the white supremacist gun-toting Georgia militia during this weekend's National March of Hate. Yes, the anti-Sharia protests. Oh, yeah. And Senate Republicans formally asked the Trump administration to kneecap Obamacare and sabotage it from within. That process already underway. On the last half, they'll be reporting that Russia is deliberately targeting active and former U.S. military personnel with propaganda and attractive women to promote the Kremlin's agenda and steal information.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Ah, yes, and look at this. Remember that time in 1987, do you? Trump told a reporter that the U.S. should bomb France as a good faith gesture while negotiating on nukes and Russia. We do we? I didn't, but thankfully Wink and Justice do. They'll tell us all about that Coming up on the after show next. Do stay tuned.